and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments that is posted next to the sign-in sheet. We have no one signed up. Would anybody like to address the board on agenda items? If not, we're going to move along to our superintendent, Dr. Padilla.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, everyone. We have a couple of items for me this evening. The first 3.1 is a conversation regarding the consolidated app, and I'm going to turn this over to our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Forde.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. So we submitted the consolidated application this year. Just wanted to give you a brief update. Title 1A was approximately $4 million. Included in that consolidated application are 21.5 AIS teachers. We've also put in funding to begin a K-1 bridge program. We fund the director of PACE and our homeless liaison. We have targeted professional development at the elementary, secondary level, exceptional learners, and equity and access level. We're focusing on supporting an ICT model for the district, specific instructional supports for iReady, mental health with thinking maps. Individual schools have plans for family and community engagement. We're continuing our audit at the secondary level for curriculum, assessment development, and the work that we do around strategic planning. In Title 2A, which is basically professional development, we are adding a humanities coach for elementary and a STEM coach for elementary. We are funding a STEAM coach at Vales Gate, various conferences, and also supporting recruitment fairs for specific positions that we're having difficulty filling. Title III English language learners, extended day program, and some consultant support, as well as Title III immigrant, again, the extended day program. And then Title IV this year is new. It's we received $293,000 to create a new and kind of innovative program. And what we've decided to do, based on the data that we analyzed, was to design a quarterly recovery for middle schools. So it's not going to be based on APEX or a computer-driven model. It's going to be designed and developed with our assistant superintendent for secondary, working with building principals and classroom teachers to design quarterly recovery for those students at the end of the first marking period that are struggling. And then they're going to get targeted interventions and supports from our teachers to support their growth so that they can get back on track right after the first marking period, so they're not waiting too long and they're not simply using external resources. They're working face-to-face with teachers that are teaching middle school students. And we think that's the right way to do it because that keeps them connected and engaged. It keeps them with somebody that they can build a relationship with trust, and we understand middle school students need that very consistently. So that's kind of in a quick overview where we are with the consolidated application that's been submitted to the state.
Board members, are there any questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Forde.
Thank you, Mr. Forde. What's coming around is something that I believe you saw already. The affiliation agreement with the Armory. 2 or so weeks ago, you guys gave your consensus to move forward with this partnership, and so in front of you are the affiliation agreements for the key partners of the Armory. St. Luke's Cornwall Hospital, the school district, Marist, the Mount, to name a few. And so tonight I just want to reiterate what was shared a couple weeks ago about how advantageous this the Armory is to our community and our district. It is something that I fully endorse. I thank you again for demonstrating your support, and I'm asking for a formal consensus moving forward. I'd love to be able to share this with Mr. Kaplan and the team there that the district is on board to ensure that the programs there continue to meet the needs of the community.
Dr. Padilla, there's no resolution on tonight's agenda, so do you want a consensus tonight and then a formal resolution next month?
Thank you, Madam President. So yes, I think that's the direction to go in.
First, does anybody have any questions or comments on this affiliation? Ms. Burton?
So this is number 5D, Performance Lead Advisor for Grant Applications. Would you just embellish what that looks like, please?
Again?
So on number 5D, Perform as Lead Advisor for Grant Applications. What does that mean exactly?
Just that we would be an integral part of providing guidance around the kinds of grants that perhaps the Armory should go for. Encouraging them that when they do go for grants to include the school district as an arm or a branch. Certainly we have various expertise that the Armory doesn't have regarding programs, and that's something that we could support them with.
Go ahead, and then I'll call on Mr. Howard.
So just to piggyback on what you just said, so does that include district staff? District staff is performing that research?
No, I don't take that as we're the lead grant writer. We are an advisor to grants that the Armory wishes to pursue to benefit our kids. So 2 members of the district would be part of their board and be part of advising them on the kind of grants they should go for.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President. I'm very excited about this agreement. As I go over there and I see all the children over there every Saturday morning, I see almost 95% of the kids are children from our school district, and I think this is an excellent opportunity for us as a district to participate and be a part of that consortium over there, but also allows us to have an opportunity to work with the other entities, i.e. Mount St. Mary's College, New Paltz, SUNY New Paltz, Cornwall St. Luke's Hospital. Allows us to have that collaborative effort, being on the inside, understanding what is happening, what's going to impact our kids, and the resources and stuff that will be available to our kids. I'm very excited about that.
Any other questions or comments? So, would you like a consensus?
I'll bring it back for a formal vote at our next board meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And my last item is item 3.3, resolution to authorize payment of membership fees in the Orange County Chamber of Commerce and the Newburgh Rotary.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clark.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Spittairen?
Yes.
Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
That concludes my items for this evening, Madam President.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. Board committees. Mr. Johnston, would you like to talk to us about the library committee, please?
Certainly, thank you, Madam President. The Library Committee met on Wednesday, November 7th. As always, thank you to the Board of Ed members who were able to attend. At the meeting, there were updates about the many ways the library reaches out to the community, from participating in a literacy conference at Mount St. Mary College in December, to planning library school district collaboration, promoting awareness of first-hand historical sources for social studies, and a library administrator visit to the Armory to develop a plan to perform further outreach there. Some priorities for next year's budget that were discussed include planning for any potential increase in the RCLS budget, consulting for space planning at the library, and the idea would be to modernize and reduce some shelf space in order to increase public space, facilities and technology updates, and improving the library collection by enabling credit card purchase of some resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We're going to move on to policy committee. Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. We met on November 7th, and we had a spirited discussion around the policy 5411, which is participation in student extracurricular activities and interscholastic athletics, which we will be meeting tomorrow to try to wrap up and get to the board for our next meeting. We also had a discussion around weighting of grades, the conversation around honors and advanced placement courses, and we had the policy committee budget priorities. We moved to the next meeting date.
Would you like to continue with exceptional learners?
Absolutely. Exceptional learners, we met on November 8th, and we had a very good meeting. We talked about we had a report on assistive technology conference. The update was given by Mrs. Stoll and Mrs. Trampani. They had a meeting in Minnesota, which was very informative. We also talked about the integrated co-teaching professional development. We had a discussion around the professional development days of 10/17 and 10/31. We also had a presentation from Dolores Lopez. So we have an overview of the exceptional learners services and also an overview of the Bridges program, which is a program that is over at Orange County Community College, which we're looking into possibly getting involved with some of our exceptional learners, which is follows them when they leave Newburgh BOE Academy and they go out into the world. And we also moved our, on the agenda for this evening, there's going to be a resolution in regards to a bilingual typist position.
Thank you. Curriculum committee is me. Most of the agenda items, most of the items we discussed are on tonight's agenda, but we also discussed budget priorities, both elementary and secondary, and next month I'll come with more specifics. We spoke about the instructional arm for iReady. We talked about credit recovery at the middle level. We talked about response for intervention. We gave an update. And then on the online library RFP. So I'd like to move on to the Audit and Finance Committee. Mrs. Santiago.
Good evening, thank you. We actually had our meeting just before this session this evening, and I believe most of the items will appear at the next board meeting agenda. Some of the items that we discussed, I believe there was a tax refund. We also discussed entering into an agreement with the Capital Market Advisory for the bond. 2 donations, one from IBM for the PTech program, some cameras, and a grant aid, as well as some possible RFPs for after-school programs, if I understand correctly. And we also started the budget priorities as well that we'll be discussing next month. We asked Mr. Kern to come back with a summary of his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Fortune.
Thank you, Madam President. This evening we have one item. It's a resolution to approve the revised 2018-2019 district calendar.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron?
During the summer, we received a letter from some members of the Muslim community looking to see if the district would recognize one of the holidays at some point. I believe it was in May of 2019. Has there been any research done into that? And if it's possible, if we somehow miraculously have do we have any snow days left over, would that be something that the district would consider using?
Mr. I didn't hear the beginning of your statement.
During the summer, we received a letter from some of the members of the Muslim community. You can't hear me?
I'm good now. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm going to need to research that, but we will definitely research that and get back to you in the Board of Ed Weekly and report it out at the next board meeting.
Any other questions or discussions on this item? Roll call, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Johnston, sorry.
Just that the holiday in May is most likely Ramadan, if you're doing the research. Yes, thank you. That's all.
Any other? Roll call, please.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop? Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
That concludes my item, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction Elementary, Mrs. Felice.
Good evening, Madam President. This evening, Elementary CNI would like to propose items 6.1 through 6.4 as part of a consent agenda.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw? Mr. Schmidt-Iron? Yes. Ms. Santiago? Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes our elementary items for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Felice. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Secondary, Dr. Spindler.
Good evening, Madam President. I present items 7.1 through 7.11 as a consent agenda.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, sir.
Just as a precaution, 7.5.
7.5. Okay. Any other? Yes, Mr. Johnston.
7.9 and 7.10.
7.9 and 7.10. Okay. Any other separating out? Okay. So, are there questions? I'm lost again. So can I do questions and discussion on the other items?
I should entertain a motion on 7.1 through 7.11 minus 5, 9, and 10.
Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion on 7.1 through 7.11 minus 7.5, 7.9, and 7.10. Thank you. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes?
Ms. Brokaw? Mr. Schmidt-Iron? Ms. Santiago? Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard? Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Let's move on to 7.5, please. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron.
So the Apex for the Empire After School Program, is that going to be used for the credit recovery and accrual, or just credit recovery?
That is going to be used to support students in their coursework, including the Regents exams that they're scheduled to take. So it's a tutorial, which is different than the course that you're thinking of. It's a tutorial to help them progress in either their studies or on their Regents exams.
So it's not going to affect any of the coursework in the classes during the day, as far as grades?
We have Apex that you approved, that the Board of Education approved over the summer for the courses. That's not in this contract.
Are there any other questions or comments on 7.5? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Brokaw? Yes. Mr. Schmidt-Iron? Yes. Ms. Santiago? Yes. Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Yes. Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes. We're going to move on to item 7.9. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Mr. Johnston?
Yes. I guess I just have to express that I'm disappointed at the amount of information that we have about these course proposals. In the form to be completed, it asks for several things: course description, course goals, and a detailed copy of the proposed course of study. The only information that I saw was short paragraphs about each course in the PDF attachment that's available here. I think we really should have a more thorough description of courses in order for them to be approved.
I'd like to feel part of that one as chair of curriculum. This was talked about at length at Curriculum Committee in depth. Mr. Etrie gave us a really, really good idea of both new pathways, nutrition and the other one, which is the other one, alternative medicine. And they were very thorough. Today, Mr. McCoy added those other items, the course approval principles and which one, and that, the description and course goals which is what you're talking about. Were they on the curriculum committee?
No, ma'am, those are just added today, this afternoon, late this afternoon, after the email request came through.
Okay. So from now on, let's put those on the agenda so that we have them. Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I still have a complaint about the generation of these proposals. I took the first proposal that I saw and the text from the presentation about it, and I did a search, and I found an identical description for a course at the Tennessee Department of Education site. The Tennessee Department of Education document is 8 pages long, has many details of the content of the curriculum. It has the requirements for student portfolios for the course. It also discusses standards alignment. And I feel that these are the kinds of things that I would like to see. I'm all for using available resources. And if something is published by the government, in general, it's up for grabs, and we should capitalize on that. Find good resources and use them. But I feel what the board has seen lacks the rigor that we should expect of our curriculum department. If we don't see what they're going to be using to define the course and what the expectations are, I don't feel that we've seen enough.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Stradone.
Just in general, when a new course is going to be created, who initiates the need for it? Is it the administration who goes to the students and says, what are you interested in? Or does the students come to the administration and say, we would like a course in this? How does it generate it?
Yeah, so just a couple comments. Certainly, if the board would like to see more rigor added to this, we're all for that. What we're seeing is consistent with what has been presented for other courses. And then two, part of what Mr. Eatry presented was how this information came about. And so it's a combination. There's a CTE task force advisory that's been steadily working on this. It's both interest generated from students, it's looking over the course of professions and seeing what's sort of growing in the area, what is unique and innovative that the state is encouraging districts to take on. So when we shared this with them, they were very excited. As you know, the state is really pushing districts across the state to do more CTE work. And so it's a combination of, the state encouraging demand from our student body versus, what's the economy telling us, where are professions that our students can get into and the likelihood of them being able to get certificated.
Go ahead, Mr. Stradone.
On the business side, I think having a well-paid job would generate interest, because the students may like some of this, but the parents like the jobs. Plumbing. We talk about this all the time with people that we know, that plumbers, if we can get the CTE program to look into plumbing, and maybe they have, maybe the cost is a little high, but the jobs that are out there right now are there. They're going to be there for a long time, so I support the CTE program, and I like to see different things. I mean, this is a little, different than I would expect, but if it's going to generate excitement and if kids are going to get a job from something like this, or some skills they can use in another job, then it's great. But I know the market is really clamoring for plumbers.
So I would ask that anyone who has access to research and ideas to please bring them forward. Part of the CTE task force is looking at a strategic plan out for several years, right? So this is just year one. We possibly could look during, in that profession as well as others that we're, there's a lot on the table right now for consideration. Just as a reminder, we're a non-component district. So we this is really good for us because we get to offer our kids something that even our local BOCES can't do. So again, this is out over several years that we'll be able to provide opportunities to our scholars. It's our hope that we'll be able to present a strategic plan to the board this year.
Are there any other questions or comments about 7.9? Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
We're going to move on to 7.10. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or comments on 7.10? Yes?
I guess this is in the same category as the other for me. But I would just like to add that in the case of alternative medicine, it might be seen as kind of a fringe sort of subject. So I would encourage, when it comes down to defining the course, if there's a way to have any standards, or if there are standards organizations or people with certain qualifications or certification that could help to validate the course, that we would seek that out.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Levinstein.
So in addition to trying to work a student to a career, I think that these are good electives that the students may have a choice of, even if they're not going into these fields. It's certainly something that will get them thinking, or maybe do something towards that, or make themselves better for it. So I think it's a good elective beside have a career opportunity.
Are there any other questions or comments on 7.10? If not, roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler. We're going to move on to, our Assistant Superintendent of Exceptional Learners, Mr. Bayer.
Good evening, Madam President. I have one item to present this evening on the consent agenda 8.1.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Second. Anybody? Thank you. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
That concludes my items for this evening, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Bayer. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Mr. Kern.
Good evening, Madam President. Thank you. Finance would like to offer 5 items for tonight on the consent agenda, items 9.1 through 9.5.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, Ms. Prokop? 9.3. Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion on items 9.1 through 9.5 minus 9.3. Questions or discussion on those items? Yes, sir?
On 9.4, do we know the cost of the emergency repair?
No. We're still working with DEC on what we need to do. The area has been put to around the 10,000 gallon tank there on the corner. They asked us to remove it. We're just working with them to see when the date would be that we can do that at a time when we don't have to interrupt school.
So there's no approximate estimate? I mean,
We'll have something more at the end of the month. That's why we wanted to put it in the emergency repair reserve, because we didn't want to tap into the general fund for the amount of money.
and the other concern I have, the second to last paragraph states that whatever money we use from the repair fund must be put back, repaid into the repair service fund within 2 years. that money came from excess that we had from budget. If we don't have that in the next 2 years, we're taking money from programming or staffing to repay a fund that may not be necessary. And I don't agree with that.
Under the rules of the repair reserve, without a public hearing, it has to be done on an emergency basis. Here, does have to put the money back over 2 years. I don't see the cost going more than probably, I'm going to give an estimate of this, probably no more than $250 for the repair reserve from this, because we have to mitigate the soil, take the tank out. We've incurred a few costs. We know what our cost is per item. It's just how much of this that we have to move out. We hit bedrock we've done soil samples, we hit bedrock at 10 feet, so we know we don't have to go down more than 10 feet to mitigate the soil. How old the spill is, we don't know, and where it goes side to side that's where the, we know from from east to west, we just don't know from north to south.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Prakash?
Yeah, my only question is, if we're doing this, we're taking out the tank, right, and mitigating the soil, if when we do that, we find out that the leak wasn't actually caused by that, but it's something further up the hill, all right, would we then go, if that's city-owned property or something like that, will they then reimburse us?
First of all, we have to find out where the leak is coming from. We've done some test borings going up the hill, and we don't see anything up the hill from the tank, other than at the same level as the tank. So we've done, I believe, 6 test bores. In the first one, that is, they went all the way down to bedrock, just above the tank, and that's where the only place that we hit contamination. The other 5, there was no contamination found in the bores going all the way down to the bedrock. So it seems to be from that point going down towards the curb. Looking at everything and talking to DEC there, it doesn't look like anything has migrated south of the curb, or towards the river, towards the curb, I should say.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk, on 9.1 through 9.5 minus 9.3.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strittmatter?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Let's move on to 9.3, please. I'd like to entertain a motion. Questions or discussion? Yes, Ms. Prakash?
Yes, I'd like to have this resolution tabled until it comes in front of committee to discuss everything that's within it. I know we have a meeting coming up on Monday.
Okay, I'd like to, so you're going to second that? Thank you.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
Has been moved and seconded yet?
Okay, so we're going to have to, I need a motion first to table.
I motion to.
And he second. Yes, sir? First, I need a motion.
Motion to put it on. So
It
point of
was.
order, it's already been moved.
It's been
It's been
moved.
moved, okay.
Okay, so we have a move and a second to table. Can I have a roll call to table, sir?
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strittmatter?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Madam President, that concludes the items for finance for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, items 10.1 through 10.13, we have those items for your consideration.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, sir? 10.2. Okay, so I'd like to entertain a motion on all items 10.1 to 10.13 without 10.2. So can I have a motion, please? Questions or discussion on those items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk. Go ahead, Mr. Strittmatter.
On 10.11, the abolishment of a typist position to create a bilingual typist. I know this started probably a few years ago because there was a need in the school for a bilingual typist. How many bilingual typists, or roughly, do we have? Because it seems to be a constant replacing typists with bilingual typists. Are there more than one bilingual typist at certain schools?
Mr. Mack?
So there, at the elementary schools, depending on the school, there's one bilingual typist. So it could be more than one at the high school.
Are there any other questions or discussion on any other of those items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Manea?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
We'll move on to item 10.2. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Go ahead, Mr. Johnston.
Where I work, they don't have anything like this, so you'll have to excuse me if I ask kind of a dumb question here. I'm just wondering how the math works with longevities. So I'm assuming that after the fixed time period, you then get the payment that's associated with that. So what happens in the years in between? Is there a payment that year, or is this just a one-time at 4 years and 7 years and 10 years? So my question is, what happens, say the 5th year? Is there a payment that year?
Mr. McLemore? Wait a minute, Mr. Shaw.
Once the longevity is acquired, it becomes an annual payment.
Thank you. And I guess just to be totally clear, I'm wondering, are the payments cumulative? Like, do you get, at 7 years, is that an addition, or is that the new amount that is the entire longevity amount for successive years?
Depends upon how it's worded, whether it's cumulative or non-cumulative.
Would someone happen to know what the case is for this resolution?
Mr. McCoy? Oh, Mr. McLemore?
It's not cumulative. It's the difference between the two, or the 3, or the 4, depending on the number of years that you've been here. So if you look at 4 years, and then if you look at the 7 years, it's the difference between the two when the person reaches the 7 years. It's not cumulative.
I guess my question is really, what happens, say, the 7th year? Do you get the number associated with the 7th year, or is that an addition to what you've been accumulating from the 4th year?
The 4 years is the amount that you get. When you get to 7 years, then it's the difference between 4 and 7. So whatever that amount is, that would be.
All right, I'm going to ask Mr. McCoy to explain.
I'm just going to use made-up numbers. In the 4th year, you get $1,000. When you get to the 7th year, you get $2,000. You don't get 1,000 plus 2,000. And then when you get to the 10th year, you would get $3,000. So that it doesn't work cumulative.
Thank you. That's clearer now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on 10.2. Does anybody else have questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
No.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
No.
Mr. McLemore.
Sorry, Madam President. That concludes my items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to the clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Ms. Maneo. I have the board minutes from October 23rd, 2018.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokop? Mr. Strittmatter? Ms. Santiago? Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard? Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein? That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet next to the sign-in sheet. We have no one signed up, but would anybody like to address the board on non-agenda items? Thank you. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strittmatter? Ms. Santiago? Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard? Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving, because we don't meet until after Thanksgiving. Have a great meal and fun. Good night.